So, No Time to Die is the fifth Daniel Craig James Bond film and the 25th James Bond film overall. So, this is essentially the end of the Daniel Craig era. This is the last of the Daniel Craig films that we're going to get, and this has been definitely one of the more interesting runs of James Bond. This has been like essentially the first James Bond of the 21st century. I know like Pierce Brosnan had a few films in the 2000s, but he started in the 90s. This is essentially the 21st century James Bond arc. And I kind of like how, for a lot of people who have expected Bond to be the same thing for, the longest time, which has just been, goofy gadgets, sexy women, ridiculous spy plots, this has been a real change. And for the most part, I actually kind of dug it. I like the fact that in Casino Royale, the Bond girl doesn't make it in the end, and that the consequences of that they play into like the plot of the following film of Quantum of Solace. So you have what previous James Bond films didn't have before, which was a Bond with consequences. So in other words, anything that happens in this Bond film will carry on into the next film. And part of having that serialization is that it has to have an endpoint. I mean, unless you intend to have other actors to step into like this continuous role. If you're gonna have Daniel Craig's era be serialized, you've kind of got to bring it to an end, and that's essentially what No Time to Die is. So you have like a bit of subversion of the typical Bond tropes here. A lot of like the stuff that you might be expecting from James Bond, or the stuff that's usually parodied, is not quite in this film. Basically, James Bond, played by Daniel Craig, is starting to become weary and a little bit more aware of what's going on in his line of work. He's currently hooking up with Madeleine Swan, who is the woman that he worked with to defeat Spectre in the previous film. He's basically settling down with her. They're going to have like a nice vacation where they enjoy each other's company and love each other. But then he's attacked by Spectre agents. Like, even though like Blofeld, played by Christoph Waltz, was captured by MI6, Spectre agents are still after him because Spectre is still active even without him. And eventually, after a really cool chase where James Bond tries to escape on motorcycles, and then he gets into his car that can spin around with miniguns, really cool stuff. Typical Bond stuff, but it's still pretty cool. Eventually, James Bond realizes that I can't keep doing this anymore if I basically want to have like a peaceful life and settle down with someone. So basically, Bond walks away from everything. He walks away from Madeleine Swan. He walks away from the agency. He goes into hiding. He rejects everything that is James Bond. Now, for a lot of people, that's initially going to be a turnoff. It's like, wait, a James Bond film where he doesn't want to be James Bond? Well, when you consider everything that he's gone through and all the patterns that he's noticed, it would kind of make sense that he wouldn't want to be James Bond, So Bond decides, like, I'm done with that work. But then, of course, he tries to get out, but they pull him right back in. Like, I say that there's a subversion of Bond tropes, but at the same time, there's a lot of, like, familiar spy tropes that get roped in here. So it's like, yeah, it's subverting the James Bond stuff, but you still got all these other familiar aspects here. Especially when it comes to, like, addressing death. Like, there are sequences where death doesn't seem to be in the cards of the villain, like he can always narrowly escape death. How Bond associates with people who he fears are going to die, and some of them actually do. So yeah, and especially with like the Bond villain, but we'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, the essential plot is that there's a biological weapon, and basically Spectre is trying to nab it. MI6 is trying to cover it up, and there's a mysterious terrorist organization that's trying to kill off Spectre so that they can have this biological weapon. So you have these three parties all fighting over this biological weapon, and Bond is thrown into the mix trying to figure out how all this is connected. And he's reluctant at first, but then realizes that, well, it's going to target my friends, and if I don't do anything, more of them are going to be picked off, so I got to do something about it. So we get Mon jumping back into action. Even though like MI6 is not as trusting of him, M is still very tight-lipped. You have Agent Nomi, who is stepping into the role of 007. She's a little bit bitter that, you had to come back after all this time. Well, I took over your position. And then you have it. Then you still have like a lot of people who are still big fans of James Bond, though. Like you have Ana de Armas, who's playing a CIA agent who is just so excited to work with James Bond. Now, of course, Ana de Armas is very much like a subversion of like the Bond trope. Like when she first shows up, she's dressed in a very sexy outfit because she's going to infiltrate a Spectre party with James Bond to try to figure out what they're up to. She's a big fan of James Bond. She's blushing around him and everything, and you immediately think, okay, James Bond is gonna bed this woman. But in the context of this, no, not really. It doesn't make sense for him to do that because, he's still in love with Madeline Swan. Even though he's pushed her away, he's gonna come back. She's gonna come back into the story, and it's someone he can't let go. And also, even if he did let her go, there's another part of Bond that realizes, man, I'm not good at relationships. After everything I've been through, when my last girl was being assaulted, and the woman that I was in love with in Casino Royale died because of my ineptitude, I'm not really good at relationships, so maybe this is not something I want to pursue. But that being said, like, it's an interesting subversion because, yeah, Bond doesn't bed Ana de Armas, but at the same time, she gets to show up, she gets to look sexy, she gets to get involved with the action. It's all like a lot of like the fun. It's like they have all like the fun Bond stuff. They've just trimmed out a few of the bits that you expect here and there. I will say the one thing that I wish that they subverted a lot more was the villain played by Rami Malek. So the villain, I believe his name is like Stefan, and something like that. But he's a standard, humanity has gone too far, and I've got to wipe out a handful of them type of villain. He's the typical Bond villain because he's got a very simplistic theme. It seems like he favors like the Japanese culture with like his kimonos and his favoring of theater masks and stuff like that, and his little like gardens. He's got like his little secret base of operations, his little island where he's got like terrorists, and he's got themed muscle guards. Like one of them has like a cybernetic eye that gets pulled out at one point, I believe, or like blinded. No, wait, if I remember correctly, his eyeball gets electrocuted and it shorts out and blows up in his head. Pretty good stuff. But like I said, that's kind of stuff we expect from Bond. The hidden base on an island. The villain gives this monologue about how humanity's gone too far. I'm going to be the one to, decide who lives and who dies. Blah, 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 blah. Same stuff. And there's really not much of his character. Like, Rami Malek goes into the standard, stiff upper lip type of character. Basically the same kind of acting that Eddie Redmayne does. From stuff like The Theory of Everything and Jupiter Ascending. He does that type of typical, yes, Mr. Bond, type of dialogue. You know if you've seen Eddie Redmayne, you know what I'm talking about. So he's not really that interesting as a villain, and it makes sense that you really don't see him that much until the third act. Because once you get to his intentions, they're kind of base and not that interesting. That it almost kind of feels like a disappointment that this is essentially Bond's last mission. And there are, at the same time, I really did like the mystery of it. I love how it's kept like fairly complex, how there's double crosses and triple crosses going on at the same time. You still get a lot of like the fun like Bond gadgets. Like I said, the minigun in the car is cool. You get great stunts. You get great fight sequences. For as much as I found the island base kind of like simple and a little bit like lacking in some of like the theme, like there's whole sets that are just like, it's just big slabs of concrete. And it just looks really boring. Like, if you're going to go for a theme villain, go the whole way. Don't, like, you can tell, like, this series is trying to, like, modernize Bond and try to make the villain a little bit more believable. But, I'm sorry, this villain has like ridiculous gardens, and he speaks in this and so many monologues, and he has trap doors in the floor and all this bizarre tech that he's got going on here. You could make him a little bit more showy, give him a little bit more character instead of being so serious, you know. It's one of those like really, if you're gonna subvert a lot of Bond tropes, that's when I feel like it should be like your top priority, is to give the villain a little bit more pizzazz, you know, like either make him more believable or lean into the theme and make him like over the top. And it feels like we're right in the middle here, and it's not quite working for it, you know. The acting is all right by everyone involved. You know, Ray Fiennes as M is still a lot of fun to watch. You have like Moneypenny returns, and Q's still there. They have minor roles. Q might do a little bit more in this, and it's only because like he does a lot more in the climax. But they're still pretty good. I did like the fact that Daniel Craig, even though he's like super serious and downtrodden in this, he still has a few moments of humor in there, like just tiny bits. Like there's a great moment where Madeline Swan, like, okay, we're gonna get into a little bit of like spoiler territory here, so if you haven't seen it yet for any reason, skip this part of the video. But Madeline Swan at one point reveals to James Bond that she has a son, that she believes is James Bond's. And then she says, like, oh, well, and I also have, like, another surprise that I want to show you. And then, of course, Bond jokes, it's not another kid, is it? Decent joke. Like, yeah, it's not like, you know, the sly, like, raised eyebrow, like, yes, classy James Bond type of joke. But it's a good joke. It's a little bit of leverage for that. You get to see Bond do, like, a few things you wouldn't expect him to do, like trying to care for kids and, yeah, basically stuff you don't typically expect Bond to do. So basically, for those who have come in expecting another James Bond that is mostly gadgets and him taking women to bed and all that, not quite here. If you're still expecting some great action sequences, some great chase sequences, and some beautiful locations, and some high-tech weaponry, you get all that fun stuff here. And the plot is a perfect, complex enough spy plot with, like I said, a lot of double and triple crosses. That's a lot of fun to follow. And in terms of like an ending for ultimately having Bond die in the end, it's a decent ending. Like, I mean, at that point, like, it's weird because like there comes a point where there's so much like subversion of like James Bond elements, like the Bond girl, the 007 ranking. At one point, Q's revealed to, you know, have a same-sex relationship. It eventually gets to a point where it kind of like plateaus, where you almost expect it. Where like they subvert so much that it gets to the point where when you get to the climax, you're almost expecting that James Bond's gonna die. Like, okay, at this point, you pretty much have to have Bond die. And if I'm being honest here, like I thought the death was bold, but I think the way they approached it was not quite as meaningful as I would like it to be. Like, essentially, if you've seen any film where a character makes a heroic sacrifice and then everyone just, says like, you know, to our hero at the end and gives that talk of like, one day I'll tell you about James Bond and all that stuff is here. And for the most part, it doesn't kind of work. It's like, okay, you kind of got the landing. Yeah, like, you kind of got the good ending here, but you can't quite stick the landing after it. All that being said, in terms of an action film, it's not bad for a Bond film. Like, a lot of people have said this in their rankings of like, where does this fit in the Daniel Craig era? It fits right in the middle. For among the 5 films, it's straight in the middle there. Like, it's a decent ending for the character. It's still a lot of fun to watch. There's some great sequences, a lot of good violence, and a few surprises here and there. But not as, like, it's not as engaging as Skyfall was. Like, to me, Skyfall is the best Daniel Craig film. And then the worst is by far Spectre. Because Spectre just felt like too much of a standard Bond film. And No Time to Die just feels like somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle where it's still trying to have all those classic Bond tropes, but also trying to present something new and take the character in a different direction. So it's a decent ending. It's like, I appreciate it. It was fun to watch. I would change a little bit of how you present some of this stuff so it doesn't just feel like, just like just ticking boxes. Like it feels like just the very idea of killing Bond was going to be bold enough. I think if you're going to do that though, you should be a little bit more to it. Like you can't just kill off Bond. I feel like you gotta have a little bit more gravitas to just, aside from just making him just having like a heroic sacrifice. That feels like I know it's not common for Bond, but it just feels very standard for that type of action film. So No Time to Die, decent film.